But yeah, since that goof happened in there somewhere, what else about this movie? Hey everybody, welcome to Cinematically Late, the series where I talk about movies that I may have missed for whatever reason, or a movie that I did see, just didn't get a chance to talk about. Today we are talking about King Arthur Legend of the Sword. Now this one I actually mentioned in my last episode of Cinematically Late, where I talked about Robin Hood, that I hadn't seen it even though it was critically panned. I think I didn't watch it mainly because of its bad reception. Now, at the recording of this video, it currently has a 31%, excuse me, rotten score on Rotten Tomatoes. However, it does have a 69% audience score, which is somewhat better, but those are way too low scores in my opinion. This movie was way better than that. Now, this movie came out in 2017. It's directed by Guy Richie, and it very much shows. Stars Charlie Hunnam, Jude Law, Desmond Hansu, and Eric Bana. And it is the story of King Arthur, which we all very much know, as I mentioned before, about public domain. Something that Hollywood absolutely loves to use because it's very much public access. You don't have to get the rights to it or anything like that. Now, this version was obviously a lot grittier than other versions of Arthur that we've ever seen. The only other version that I've seen kind of gritty like this goes back to like way back in the day. I don't remember who directed it, but it starred Keira Knightley. I think Clive Owen was also in it as King Arthur. It was King Arthur. I don't remember much about it. But that one was pretty gritty. But this one was a little bit more gritty, but a little bit more fun to it. Not quite as serious as that movie. This one was way better by any means. Probably my favorite King Arthur movie, which doesn't really make a lot of sense considering how badly it was received. Now, don't get me wrong. I do understand a lot of the reasons maybe why it wasn't well received, but just enjoying it for what it was, or maybe because my expectations were so low, I really enjoyed it. So let's go ahead and break down exactly what I liked, but also recognize why it was kind of bad. Now, starting off with point number one has got to be the action. The action alone was pretty badass. I actually had a lot of fun with that. I don't think that it was super mega grounded in reality all the time. There were some pretty what I would call video game-like cutscenes in terms of like animation style. Some of it kind of took me out of it with the visuals, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the action overall, it felt very visceral, very real, very raw, very much like Guy Ritchie's style. He did have a couple of slow-mo motions, but it was just sort of that hand-to-hand, very physical type of fighting oftentimes that made it a little bit more realistic and have a lot more fun with it. It didn't feel like I was too disconnected with the storyline. I felt like I was actually very connected with it. Unlike that version that I mentioned with Clive Owen, it felt very much like just talking a lot during that movie. This one it put talking, but with having some action, some magic elements to it that kind of kept me interested throughout the runtime. And then moving on to point number two, the actual acting of the movie. It really wasn't that bad. Was some of it overacted? Sure. But there's certain connotations with storylines like this. You kind of have to go that extra mile because people know it so well. So how are you going to stand out? How are you going to be different in a world where there's already been hundreds of King Arthur movies? How are you going to be different? You have to sort of sell yourself. You have to be a little bit more flamboyant, a little bit more extra to be able to make people remember that this is your version of King Arthur. And I definitely got that. I felt like each character actually had their moments. They felt like they were very real compared to a lot of it, even though there were those extra elements of magic being involved in this world. But it was a fantasy movie. It is what it is. You have to take it at its face value. It wasn't trying to tell a real life story of Arthur. It was just trying to tell you a different perspective, a more visceral version of Arthur, a lot more gritty, if you will. And although this movie was gritty and it did feel very real, point number three has to be the visuals. They just weren't quite that good. And I think that's what really people maybe didn't like about this movie. As some of the visuals, it did feel a little bit like a cutscene from a video game like I mentioned earlier. From the very opening scene, it kind of takes you out of it and makes it very unbelievable because there are these mountain-sized elephants. Later in the movie, there's this mountain-sized snake. These creatures that don't feel real, even though they obviously are realistic animals, but because of the context in which they're used and how grand of a scale it is, it kind of takes you out of the movie. It makes you believe there's no way this could be possibly real. And so I think that's what a lot of people maybe had a problem with. There even is some scenes with like an eagle where this enchantress, or mage as they call her, uses these animals and like sees from their perspective and sort of acts on their behalf. When those scenes happen, it feels very much a little too computer graphic, a little too CG for my taste. I feel like they probably could have upped it just a tiny bit to make it a little bit more interesting and realistic, maybe a little bit more photorealistic. Considering it was only 2017, they had the technology, maybe they just didn't use it to the best of their ability. And then the final fight scene, it's cool, don't get me wrong, but it is 100% all CG and it completely takes you out of it. I believed absolutely none of it. It just didn't feel like a Guy Ritchie movie because it went so far into that realm of CG. Guy Ritchie does a very good job at giving you that hand-to-hand, that in-camera, very physical, in-the-moment type of thing. And in this one, it just did not come through at all. It fell completely flat because he relied so heavily on CG and making these characters do things that in a realistic world, nobody would be able to pull off. And I just realized my background was off the entire time, so I have no idea how long that was like that. But I've been trying to have the visuals up there. Yeah, since that goof happened in there somewhere, what else about this movie? But I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend checking it out. If you watched it at the time, I don't know what you were thinking. If you watch it now, it's pretty badass and awesome. I actually ended up wanting to purchase it because I enjoyed it so much. This is a movie that I could see myself watching again versus some other ones like that version with Clive Owen that I could care less if I ever watch that again. Don't really want to. This one, I would probably watch it maybe a good 2-3 times because that action is so cool. It had those elements that just were outside of the box in comparison to the story of Arthur that you just would not see anywhere else. So guys, those are my thoughts on King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. If you have seen it, let me know your thoughts and opinions down in the comment section down below. Also make sure while you're down there to leave a thumbs up, as well as hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I do have a new Cinematically Late every single Thursday, as well as I'm doing a giveaway, which I'll leave the link over there in the corner if you guys want to check that out as I'm trying to get up to 300 subscribers. But yeah, really that's all I have for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.